I've tried everything else, and my sofa has been a prison, basically, because that would be where I'd spend all my time, when I was trying to recover, in my view, or just not do anything to make the pain worse. So I just got rid of it. I just took it out of my house, put it in my garage, and just thought, yeah, let's give this a go. And that, like the sitting on the floor, I believe, just game changer, just changed everything for me. And to begin with, I could only sit upright for about 2 minutes because my lower back would be too painful. So I would sit upright for about 2 minutes, and then I would lie down. And then very, very quickly, I was able to sit for longer and longer and longer. Even now, I can't quite believe how quick it was. So just to put it into context, when I first started ground sitting, I was still in quite a lot of pain, to the point where I could only sit for 2 minutes. I started ground sitting in June. In the December, I did a marathon. So 6 months, it was that quick.
When Samphire Hayes reached out to me with her amazing story of rapidly emerging from a cocoon-like prison of chronic pain to becoming a thriving individual, I knew we had a lot in common and wanted to help her share her story. She can hardly believe the transformation herself, but it just goes to show what human beings are capable of when they share knowledge about the positive changes that can be made in life. It was one podcast that changed her life, and so it was great for her now to speak on Make Movement Matter to hopefully make changes in your life. I started by asking her how she feels today.
I'm thriving, really, at the minute. I don't have a lot of pain. I do sometimes. It's not 100%, but everybody does, because I'm a human being and we all do. But yeah, generally, most days are pain-free. I'm pretty active. I was climbing trees in Regent Park the other day.
Amazing.
So yeah, I love to climb trees. I love to go wild swimming, walking up hills and mountains, and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, pretty good at the minute.
So these are things that make life special for you now, basically.
Yeah, being out in nature and rambling about.
And how do you see your future at the moment in terms of your movement and your capability?
At the minute, I'm focusing on kind of getting stronger. So I feel like I've spent a lot of the last few years, or the last 2 years specifically, quite actively trying to get better. And now it sort of feels like it's about getting stronger in my body.
Right.
So yeah, just sort of working on building up that strength, and but also just being pretty active and doing stuff outdoors mostly is what I love to do. So
given your story, which we're going to go into a little bit, do you now feel you can rely on your body?
Yes. I definitely did not for a long time. I felt that my body was broken and it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, and why me? And was quite young, so it just seemed very unfair. And yeah, spent a lot of time stuck with not being able to trust my body, fearing pain if I did too much, or and I ended up doing nothing, which then actually made it worse. But yeah, now I have full confidence and I do all sorts of crazy things with my body, and just trust that it's going to be okay.
And celebrate the fact that it does, the fact that you can rely on it. Yeah. And what a lovely thing to be able to almost take for granted that that hopefully is the way it's going to be, because you now have the tools and the understanding and the awareness. So our shared experience is from the effects of chronic pain, how that can affect your life. And that's why you reached out to me. And I was instantly moved by your story, and obviously responded straight away and said, let's talk, let's share. So, but before we hear about your incredible journey, can you define for our listeners what you see chronic pain as being? Because I think it's a term that's used a lot and perhaps isn't that well defined. So just in your opinion.
So, I mean, the kind of medical definition is 3 months or longer of a sort of persistent pain, I guess. But that kind of simplifies it a bit to me.
Yeah.
It's kind of just, an easy way for the doctors to go, oh, has it been over 3 months? Yep, then it's chronic pain. And we need to have pain. We have a pain system. You stub your toe or you cut your finger, or the body's alerting you, and that's generally an acute pain. But if it does persist for a long period of time, then it kind of goes into this chronic category. And so many different conditions can be chronic and have chronic pain. For me, what I suffered with was a kind of at a certain time there did become a kind of physical cause that was showing up on an MRI, but that wasn't until much later. So for the first I had sort of 10 plus years of chronic pain, and for the first 5 years of that, the doctors had no idea why. So it was, there's nothing showing on MRI scans, there's nothing, we have no idea why you're in pain, you just are. And so I think often there's a lot of people out there that have that similar. So I was given a fibromyalgia diagnosis, which is generally the diagnosis in the absence of there being any physical reason. Later on, I was given a diagnosis of degenerative disc disease because there were things that were showing on my spine. And both of those are difficult, because one is pain with no reason and no cure. And then the other one, there was a reason. The cure was a spinal fusion, which I decided not to have, because actually, knowing what I know now, I'm so glad I didn't, because I don't think that would have actually helped. But so tied up with chronic pain is not just the pain itself; it's also, for me, at points there was no hope that I was ever going to get better. It was just this pain that was going to go on forever and ever and ever, and I never thought that I would get better until the last few years, when I started to make improvements.
Which I can entirely empathize with, because I didn't ever get a diagnosis of anything. And I think the lack of diagnosis felt like a relief when I eventually got my scan, which was 3 years in. But actually, it also didn't really help, because then there was no reason. And I was searching for a reason. And I think that was the point for me when I had to sort of look in other ways, search around to say, okay, there is something not working in my body. There must be some kind of reason, but just perhaps not a clinical reason. Is there something beyond this? And so my search deepened, which I know you've done the same thing, and we're both very grateful that we did, because we wouldn't be stood here feeling like we are now. So you are working with people and have studied a lot about chronic pain. Do you also see that there is a link, any link between chronic pain and trauma, or things in our past, experiences in our past, that can perhaps make pain become chronic pain?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge link, and there's so much research on this now, between trauma and chronic pain, or stress and pain, just in general. And for me, part of the issue when I was trying to get treatment was that no one ever linked those things together. It wasn't till I linked them myself through my own studies, and suddenly went, oh, okay. But no one ever said, oh, well, you have, because I had a history of PTSD also. Right. And no one ever linked those and said, oh, PTSD and chronic pain, yeah, those go together. And here's how we can work with your body on your mental health, which will then help you with your chronic pain. It wasn't till I linked those things together. But, the more stressed we are, the more upregulated we are, the more pain we're going to have. I mean, it affects our digestive system even, so stress has a huge impact on our physical being, and trauma specifically, a lot of trauma symptoms, if we think about the symptoms that we might have from trauma will be physical symptoms,
Yeah.
and we'll feel it in our bodies. And, the link between pain, autoimmune diseases, all sorts of chronic illnesses and trauma is, quite well established now. So, but for me, that was the key in me getting better, was understanding the link between those two, and then how I could use different skills, different practices to work on both my physical and my mental health together in order to get better.
It's a recurrent theme on this podcast. We'll often go in to talk about something that seems purely physical or an experience, and we always end up linking the fact that the body and mind are one. And it's so interesting that we have such a tendency to separate the two, and see it as two sort of almost like different systems. Like everything from the neck up is doing one thing, and everything from the neck down is completely ignoring. And yet our bodies wouldn't move if we didn't have a brain. So it literally is a recurrent theme, and but for the good, hopefully. That's it, and trying not to even, it's interesting, it's quite hard for us to, when we're talking about the body or being human and so on, it's quite hard to not still be separating things out, and yet we do, and we'll talk about that more as the conversation goes on. So your experience, it was a very individual experience, as it is for us all. We're all completely individual in what has happened to us. So can you remember a time when your pain started, or did it kind of just creep up on you?
Well, it was in my first pregnancy. So before I fell pregnant with my daughter, who is now 12, I was fairly fit, fairly active. I had an active job. I was a runner. I wasn't massively healthy. I did eat rubbish and didn't exercise that well. But, as far as, I didn't have any pain or anything like that. And sort of partway through my first pregnancy, I started to develop pelvic issues and was diagnosed with, they either call it SPD or PGP. Yeah, they have lots of different names for it, but
that was me as well. Yes.
Yeah. So that was really that was really my first ever, experience of having persistent pain, because that pain just didn't go away. And it came around 5 months pregnant. And then by 7 months pregnant, I was signed off of work, because I was doing a desk job at that time, but even just getting into work and back was a problem. I was having to lie down on the floor because sitting up was really difficult. And they said to me, it will, as soon as you have the baby, it'll all go away, it'll be fine. And then it didn't. But just a note that around the same time as my late pregnancy and early months of motherhood, there was a lot of trauma that was happening. Multiple traumas were happening in my family life, ending in the death of my father when my daughter was about 9 months old. Yeah. Right. So within the first year of her, so, I just had a baby and I've got all that going on. So for me, the trauma and the physical, I was already vulnerable because I was pregnant. Yeah. And I am hypermobile, so the extra hormones that we get to make everything relax, that exacerbated my hypermobility, which then set my pelvis out of alignment. So that's kind of what happened. And then I, for the next 2 years, kind of struggled with pain. And then they gave me an MRI scan. They said, there's nothing on the scan. It's all fine. Then I fell pregnant with my son, and then that was really horrendous, that pregnancy. So I was pretty much bedbound by the end of that, because it just got worse on top of what had happened with the previous pregnancy. And I was struggling to just even walk to the ensuite bathroom. It was pretty horrible. And then I was induced early because of the pain with him. Again, the doctor said, it'll all ease off once you've had him, and it never did. And then I think it was, looking back now, there was this massive fear of pain. So there was this massive fear of doing anything that would make the pain worse. And so I became pretty immobile. I just really didn't do anything. So I'd spend the whole day just on the sofa, I'd take the kids to school or nursery or wherever it was. And then I'd come home, I'd sit on the sofa, and then I'd go back and pick them up. And I was scared to do anything. So I wasn't moving. And so that then led to me having degeneration in my spine. And then in 2017, I herniated my disc, and then had 8 months of recovery from that, that was horrendous. That was probably some of the worst pain that I had.
I was going to say that's like pain on top of pain.
Yeah, well, that was, it wasn't until, it started in my pelvis, and then probably maybe when a couple of years after my son was born, so probably 4 or so years later, it then developed a kind of widespread pain. So I'd have pain in my hands and in my neck and in my shoulders, and it was like, well, hang on a second, this has started in my hips. What's going on here? And so, that was the fibromyalgia diagnosis, which is the unexplained pain that's kind of around the body. That's a bit it's a bit of a vague diagnosis, really, but
but very vague, because it doesn't give you sort of hard, solid, this is exactly what's wrong in this place,
no.
and yet so utterly real for the person who's living it. So specific in so many places, for you in multiple places in the body, for me in one main area, and so utterly real. And yet you either get that diagnosis, which I didn't, you did, and you still feel like you're not fully believed in that pain, because pain's that annoying thing that no one can see it. You don't go more red every time you're having a severe flare up, apart from the look in your eyes when you are the lights dim, because you really can't face the way you're feeling, and emotionally you're on a knife edge because you're exhausted and highly emotional, and that's a horrible state of being, because I don't know about you, but I would also doubt myself. I had moments of thinking, am I just making this all up? And looking into chronic pain, the way it's discussed in some environments, talks about this sort of perpetuation, this memory of pain that you have had severely and acutely in your body. But often when you have bodies like ours that have hypermobility, but even when you don't, where the pain, you're in a cycle that mentally you can't release yourself from. And looking back, for me, that now does actually make sense. But at the time, I found it horrible. I really felt like shouting from the rooftops, I'm not making this up. This is absolutely real. This is my lived experience. And please believe me. I don't know if you felt the same.
Oh, for sure. And I think that, when I meet people who are in chronic pain now, I think one of the biggest factors that exacerbates it for them is people not believing them, or having doctors, because doctors might say, oh, well, it's in your head, and kind of technically it is, because the brain is what is,
That's
so
if we
isn't it? Yeah, but so many people have kind of heard that phrase and have taken it to mean that, oh, well, you're making it up. And for me, when I was going through the worst of my pain, I was thinking, well, I'm never going to get better. The doctors have told me this, I'm never going to get better. I just have to accept that this was, what was happening. And I was kind of very in a kind of victim, this has happened to me, why me? And then, for someone then to go, oh, well, it's in your head anyway. It was kind of, that was kind of, it was like, well, I'm not being believed. No one believes me. And it was this really frustrating, well, not even just no one believes me, but the doctors, saying, well, you're going to be in pain for the rest of your life, Sam. So you just need to get used to it.
And
you just need to accept that. And I'm like,
yes. Yeah. Okay. Accept where you're at. This is your lot. And that's interesting, because obviously your life was so narrow at that point. Like so narrow. It couldn't be sort of any more narrow, almost, apart from being completely and utterly bedbound. And I felt like the whole time this frustration led me to be, I think I am a bit of a fighter, and I was angry. Maybe it's my Scottish roots. I was angry at what was happening, as you say, to me. But I also had something inside me that said, I don't believe that what you're saying is true, that that this is my lot. And I didn't have doctors saying that to me. I had very little conversations with medical people at all. And those in the know, when I would ask those questions about, when's it going to go, would sort of nod and smile. They wouldn't give me an answer because they knew there was no answer. And that was the honest answer, to not say that, because we can't see futures for others.
No.
But so your life was narrow, but did you have that feeling that there was a future version of you that almost you felt owed, that would be better? Or had you actually given up hope of that?
I did at some point give up. Yeah. There was a period where I think it was when I had herniated my disc and I could barely stand up, and it was just utterly awful. And I didn't leave the house for 8 months, and I didn't really have anyone come and visit me, because when you're living in chronic pain, you're not really a very nice person, or I wasn't. And I lost friends, and I lost, it had a massive impact on my marriage. Relationships were affected because I wasn't really very pleasant to be around, because I was in pain. You think of a dog who's got an injury, they're very guarding, and they'll bite you if you go near them. And I kind of became that very guarded,
Love that analogy. Yes.
I don't want you to come near me. And I mean, I'm doing this as I'm talking,
Yes.
because, that was how I felt. I didn't even want people to touch me because I was in so much pain. So even just like hugging my children, was difficult. But yeah, there was definitely a point where I gave up, and I decided, right, well, this is my lot. I'm disabled. I've been told I'm going to be like this forever. The spinal surgeon told me I had the spine of an 80-year-old, which when you're in your 30s is not really the thing you want to be hearing, right? So he'd already written me off as, well, if I'm 80, well, So I applied for the blue badge. I got the mobility scooter. I started to embrace this disabled person as that's who I was, right? And there I was in my mid-30s, disabled.
Wow.
But there were a few little seeds that had been planted. So I'd watched a TV program with Rangan Chatterjee called Doctor in the House. I don't know if you
brilliant.
saw it.
Yes,
and he had worked with a lady, he went and stayed with a lady who had fibromyalgia, and it was around the same time as my diagnosis. But I wasn't really ready to receive that at the time. It just kind of planted a seed, and I bought his book and I put it on the bookshelf, and it never got read really. But it was kind of, oh, okay. And so really, I think it was when I started to train as a counsellor, as a therapist, started to look at my mental health, started to link the trauma, and I was like, oh, okay, hang on a second. There might be something here. I started to study neuroscience to understand the pain and why that was happening. And it was like, oh, okay, so maybe there's a bit of hope. And then I kind of got angry and was like, well, hang on, those doctors told me I was never going to get better. I'm going to prove them wrong, right? So then the anger, as soon as I had found that little bit of hope, because the hope had been so bleak and I was living within that but as soon as I kind of was like, hang on a second, I'm now understanding my body isn't broken. My body's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's trying to keep me safe. It's giving me
protecting you. Yes.
It's giving me a notification there's something wrong. It's giving me pain when maybe it shouldn't be pain that it's giving me, but it's trying to tell me something's wrong. And I've been ignoring it. And now I need to listen to it and tune in and see what's actually, what I need to do. And so I had that little bit of hope. And then, thinking about those doctors, and I was like, right, I'm going to prove you wrong.
And then you shift to, as you said before, going from the victim mentality, because you genuinely believe this has happened to you, to advocating for yourself, to saying, actually, there's no other cheerleaders around here for me, unless you're lucky to have support. So I'm going to have to do this for myself. And I presume this was the sort of search for wellness was well and truly on the way. And so obviously I'm trying to think of your timeline, because you talk about being in a mobility scooter, which is quite an image, especially seeing you now, thankfully. So your shrunken existence really was hugely shrunken. And now you're living what you call a thriving life. So what would you say was if you can remember, the time frame from sort of that moment to the point where you really were on a roll and you could see a much clearer future for yourself?
So the mobility scooter, I think I bought that in about 2017. So not very long ago, really, in the grand scheme of life. So 2017, and that really I didn't use very much. It was because I was embarrassed to use it. So I bought that because I wasn't able to go out with my children on days out. So my ex-husband would take them on, weekends, places, and I'd stay at home and I would miss it. So got the mobility scooter so that I could go, and then didn't use it that many times really, but also had been hiring wheelchairs and stuff to kind of go places, and it was pretty miserable really. And then when did I start my training? So that'd be about 5 years. So where are we now? So about 2019 is when I started training as a therapist,
right?
Because I had to leave my previous job. I'd been on a career break, but I couldn't go back because it was too physical and I couldn't physically do it anymore. So I thought, well, I'd like to retrain. I had a psychology degree. I'd always quite enjoyed the counselling part of that. So decided to train as a therapist. And then, like within the training, so that was about 3 years worth of training, and started to read different books. And I read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. That was the real kind of,
Brilliant.
What, this is my life.
Yes.
This is so that was one of the golden moments for me, was reading that book. And then so it was a few years of really working on my mental health. And when you train as a therapist, you have to do a sort of a lot of work on yourself, applying different models. Started to love myself even, right? Because I had hated myself. I thought I was this horrible person because I was shouting at everybody all the time. Didn't really want to have engagement with anyone because I was just so in my pain. So I thought of myself as this horrible person that was useless, failing my family, had really, my self-esteem was in the toilet. When I started doing my counselling training and applying different models to myself and trying to understand myself, it was like, okay, actually, so I was kind of building up that self-esteem, building up that self-love. And then once I'd kind of gotten to a space, so it was breaking that fear of, I can't walk because if I go out for a walk, I'll be in too much pain. And so everything was about an avoidance of pain. And in my head, that meant doing nothing. So I just didn't do anything.
That's the safest option in theory.
Yeah. But actually doing nothing made everything worse. Now I realise. And, in a sofa, kind of in this sort of bubble that I sort of felt, that was comfortable, but actually wasn't really serving me. And so, once I then kind of looked at fear and I started to take a view of, okay, what can I do in the pain level I'm in today? So I started practicing mindfulness, and I was like, right, I need to be more in the moment, because if I'm fearful of tomorrow, I'm just literally going to do nothing. So, okay, what can I get away with today? Okay, can I go for a 20-minute walk with the dogs? Okay, I'll try. I'll give it a go. Or sometimes it would be a no, but it would be, okay, what can I do today? And even we'll worry about dinner time when dinner time comes. Can I cook dinner tonight if I go for a 20-minute walk? Okay, well, we'll see what happens, And so I was kind of trying to be in the moment. What can I do in the pain level I'm in now that's going to be, because I actually liked going out. I used to hire I used to call it like a 4x4 mobility scooter. It's called a tramper. And so I would go to this this place called Bedgebury, which is in South England, and and I would go and I'd be out in nature, and because I've always wanted to be out in nature, but with struggle. So going for a 20-minute walk, I would feel better in myself if I managed to do that. So that's kind of how I started. Was like, okay, just a 20-minute walk can I do it today? Oh, yes, I can. I do it. I may or may not have a flare up later. And then whether I could do it the next day would be debatable. But then I was getting out. So I was doing 20 minutes. And then within, I don't know, a few months, it then sort of was half an hour. It was sort of starting to get longer and longer. And so that's kind of how it first started, was just a walk with the dog, just take the dog for a walk, see how there was a bench that I could go sit on and then come back if I needed to.
Yeah.
And that was just out in nature. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was the start. And then I heard a podcast which changed my life, which was Ron Chastity's podcast, actually. So he's been quite a big factor in my journey. And it was this guy called Tony Riddle, who was talking about natural living. And so he sat on the floor, he didn't sit in chairs. He had barefoot, or he would have barefoot shoes. And I'd heard of barefoot shoes because a previous osteopath had recommended them, but I hadn't really embraced them. It was good. But yeah, so I'm kind of looking at this, and I'm hearing this podcast, and I'm thinking about this guy, and I'm looking at the picture of this guy thinking, well, yeah, but that's all right for you. He's ripped and he's this, really fit. He's an ultra endurance athlete. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah. But something, it stuck in my head, and I was like, okay. And about 2 weeks after I heard the podcast, I thought, right, I've tried everything else, and my sofa has been a prison, basically, because that would be where I'd spend all my time, when I was trying to recover, in my view, or just not do anything to make the pain worse. So I thought, okay, let's give it a go. So I just got rid of it. I just took it out of my house, put it in my garage, and just thought, yeah, let's give this a go. And that, like the sitting on the floor, I believe, just game changer, just changed everything for me. And to begin with, I could only sit upright for about 2 minutes because my lower back would be too painful. So I would sit upright for about 2 minutes, and then I would lie down. And I was just watching the telly at the time. I'd just be watching whatever rubbish I was indulging in at the time. I'd just sit and watch telly, and then I would lie down, and then I would sit back up when I felt able, and then I would lie back down again. And then very, very quickly, I was able to sit for longer and longer and longer.
So if we can just pause there, so I bang on and on about the floor, as you probably know, and I think people really sort of struggle with the concept, just because sensible things like, it's cold, it's hard, it's dirty, it's whatever. And I'm presuming that you still, because you were in so much pain and discomfort, you probably still made it a comfortable space that you were being. I'm sure you probably started with bolsters and cushions and blankets so that you didn't have those things. But what's interesting to me and what you've just said is even though it was the removal of the chair, the sofa, what you went from was real sedentarism and a lack of movement, just by removing that, to a huge amount of gentle, small movement where you started to respond to your body. So when you were in a position that was uncomfortable, you moved into a position that was more comfortable. And you intuitively did that. You're, as you say, so you were sitting, but then not just too long. Your back probably said, your core not necessarily strong enough to hold you just yet for as long as you wanted. So then you would go back to lying down, which is still a wonderful, different position in itself. So it's great that you sort of took that leap of faith ultimately, because a lot of people would just say no. Now, as you we've discussed before, I haven't removed the seating things like that in my house, but I choose to be on the floor as much as I possibly can, because I feel the benefit from doing that. And I think it's so powerful what you're saying, because you're literally saying that one small choice became a massive movement habit for your body that started to trigger processes in your body that said, actually, I'm all right. I'm all right. And also you were living with different type of discomfort than, sorry, you're living with discomfort over pain. So perhaps at that point you were focusing less on pain and starting to pull it back to, I'm uncomfortable, but I can actually make myself more comfortable. Does that make sense to you? Do you agree?
Yeah, well, it was sitting within the discomfort to the point of it's kind of playing with those edges, right? So it's not
Right.
being so uncomfortable that it's like, this is excruciating, unbearable, but it is accepting it's less comfortable to sit on the floor than it is to sit in a sofa, right? That's why we sit in sofas. That's why that's become a thing that everyone has a sofa in their house, because we want to, slob and watch the telly
Switch off.
and switch off, and we want to have that cozy, space to do that. But for me, the sitting on the floor, I felt like I tried everything else, and I just thought, okay, for me, it felt an easy thing to do. I'll just sit on the floor and not on the, although it wasn't easy because I was in pain.
And did you wonder if it really would have an effect? Were you kind of doing a bit of a test? Because you only put it in your garage. You didn't just get rid of it.
No, I put it in the garage, and actually it stayed there in the garage. I only recently actually got rid of it, not because I was planning on putting it back. I just lost track of everything. And it's like, once it's out of sight, out of mind. So yeah, there's loads of stuff in my garage that needs to go. But but yeah, I mean, it was just a spur of the moment. Right, I'm getting rid of the sofa. It was quite empowering, and also because that sofa, the symbolism of it as well, that it had been that prison for me. So it was like, right, I think it was. If it hadn't been the sofa, I don't know. I think it was just, there was something about getting rid of my sofa that just felt really empowering. And and then, like you say, I mean, I actually didn't use a bolster to start with. I just sat straight on the floor. But I do have, like, around my house, I'm in my front room currently. I don't have any chairs in my house at all now. But I have bolsters. There's a bolster just here. I have meditation, the round circular cushions. There's cushions everywhere, blankets everywhere. I have these mats that are sort of filled with wool, which are quite sort of nice to sit on, quite comfortable. And then there's a rug on the floor. So it's not, I'm not sat on a, cold stone surface. You make it as comfortable as you can do. And like you say, you change position. So it's not about, okay, I'm going to sit cross-legged for 4 hours. It's about, okay, I'm going to sit in this position, and then I'm going to go into a shin box position, or I'm going to bring my knee up, or I'm going to rotate through the different, and just in doing that, you're getting a workout, like you say, because you're moving between the positions. Yeah. But then on top of that, you've got getting up and down off the floor, like 30 times a day, because I'm going to the bathroom or to get a cup of tea or, whatever. And when I first started, getting up was very, using the windowsill to kind of pull me up. And I was sort of quite, getting up and down was really tricky. And now, I get up and down without holding anything, and I just sort of spring up and down. And just, like if I heard this, I wouldn't believe it. So it's very difficult because even now I can't quite believe how quick it was. So just to put it into context, when I first started ground sitting, I was still in quite a lot of pain, to the point where I could only sit for 2 minutes, right? So I was still in quite a lot of pain. I started ground sitting in June. In the December, I did a marathon. So 6 months. Whoa. It was that quick. It was such a transfer. This is why I say it changed my life, and it was so transformational. And on the physical recovery side of things, sitting on the floor, just, other things like being barefoot and the barefoot shoes and the natural movement stuff that I do, but really the sitting on the floor. That's within 6 months of sitting on the floor, I walked a marathon. So
I wish I could also track back and agree with you, because but in all honesty, probably I only probably took to the floor in the last year and a half, I would say, of getting out of pain. But that was me getting out of pain. So my pain trajectory, was on the decline with the flare-ups and the bumps as it goes. But so you're right. It really can be that influential. And that's incredible. So your marathon, I think you've done 2 now, did you say, as well, since then?
Yeah. So
And is that running or is that
walking?
Walking or?
So originally, so I signed up to do. I mean, it was nuts because it was the November that I signed up to do the London Marathon. So I'd only started ground sitting in the June, and then by November I felt like, okay, I'll just do a marathon. And I'd started running again, and my intention was to run the London Marathon. But actually, there are some things, when you're recovering from chronic illness, when you haven't moved very much, actually, I was getting a bit of knee pain and I was getting a few sort of niggles and stuff. And I thought, you know what, I'd rather be able to actually finish it than continue to try and run and train as if I'm going to run it. So I ended up walking the marathon in the December was preparation for running the marathon. But then in the interim period between December and April, I made the decision just to walk. Well, I say just to walk. I mean, it took me 9 hours. I was on my feet for the entire time, and it's hard to walk a marathon as well because of the length of time that it takes.
I think it's harder in some ways. I think it's harder. And actually, I don't know if you listened to Rangan Chatterjee's podcast a couple of weeks ago with Helen Hall, the running coach. She often advises people to walk, because actually then you are giving your body a slight breather if the run is too intense for you. But she also was saying to purely walk a marathon is incredibly tough on the body. So that's quite something.
Well, given that sometimes I struggled to walk to the toilet from my bed, the ensuite, to then walk 26 miles is, so
it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So this new version of you, obviously you were clearly so much more hopeful about life, your future. I'm sure you were smiling an awful lot more than you had been in a decade. And I'm sure everyone around you was celebrating the sort of new you. So the things that you now had in your toolkit, we've talked about ground sitting, talked about barefoot, and the importance of that, getting out in nature, and also doing some sort of mental, some soul searching, some self-analysis. What other things did you change in your life that really helped you to jettison forward the way you did?
So the practice of mindfulness, meditation, breath work. Breath was very significant for me. The breath can help us to down regulate, and to, when we're kind of stressed out and we're kind of up here, we can kind of lower that central nervous system, calm ourselves down using breath. And that's one of the biggest things in my toolbox, whether it is for, if I'm going through a particularly stressful period, or I'm about to do something that's quite stressful, have an encounter with somebody who I know is a difficult relationship, or, it's something that I can use for that. But then it's also, if you're in pain, actually by lowering down that central nervous system activity, that can then help with the pain. And people often think, really, breathing for pain, is that really helpful? But actually it's probably my go-to, my sort of first thing that I would do. I would sit and I will be with that breath. And, particularly if I get pain now, I'll go to the breath, and then,
because you're telling the nervous system, you're sending a message back, in a sense, to say, I'm safe, I'm okay. This is all right. As you were saying right back at the start, when you're in the moment and the experience of that pain, and yet you're sort of, your natural reaction is to, like you were doing physically at the beginning, tense and tight and protective and shallow breathing up too high. If you can acknowledge that that's everything that's going on and try to counteract that, and as you say, use tools that can say, no, I am safe and it's all right, then it's brilliant that you find the effect that you do from doing that. I wish I'd known that at the time as well, to be honest, because I absolutely didn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, even like mouth breathing versus nose breathing, for example. I mean, breath is very, we could spend a whole hour talking about breath now.
Yes, I ended my last series on a podcast about breathing retraining and the importance of, as you're just mentioning, nose breathing, and where you breathe, and not being upper chest breathing and so on, because it really is. It's something that we all absolutely take for granted because we are all doing it if we're alive, and yet so many people don't realize how it can affect us chronically.
Yeah.
If
Well,
if we're
not just with
breathing
pain,
badly.
but, with digestion of your food, with your immune system,
Yeah.
everything. The body is, a complex organism, and it everything works in tandem. And so, we have all these hormones, and all the hormones will affect other hormones. So cortisol is the stress hormone. If you're stressed, your cortisol is going to be higher, which then has a knock-on effect to, even the hormone that controls hunger, for example, or the hormone for sleeping, it will affect those other hormones. And so it only takes a little bit of something to be out of whack. And that could be, stress increasing cortisol, or it could be breathing incorrectly, something minor that we can just kind of tweak. Breath is probably my biggest go-to, and probably the first thing that I work with clients, because it's simple. We can all breathe, but it's just kind of learning very simple techniques. But I think it's really empowering to have something, when someone first comes to work with me, it's something that they can take away from the first session, because it's
and that
empowering.
Can maybe have an immediate effect as well.
It can have an immediate effect, but also there's something in having something, right? Because if you were just like, I'm in all this pain, I'm really stressed, and I've got nothing to do, I don't know how to, then you feel helpless. Whereas if you go, oh, okay, actually I can breathe. And even if, you're not necessarily feeling the benefits straight away, because, it kind of takes time if your central nervous system's used to always being up here, it's going to take a while for it to kind of settle back down.
So basically, you're in control.
You've got
you
something.
have some level of control where you felt utterly out of control. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not kind of, what am I going to do? I'm just really stressed out. Okay, I can reach for the breath. And then, kind of building on that, there are other down regulation practices that we can do. So things like tapping, things like singing, humming. Singing and humming are probably two of my favorites. I love to sing.
Joyful, exactly. And that's finding the joy where you've not had much joy for a long time, or you've been unable to tap into that feeling of joy. Then it's so allowing you to go back to that.
Well, I think music and dance, again, dance is one of my favorite medicines. So now that I can dance, I go to a lot of ecstatic, sober, conscious dances, and just moving my body. So, but even, I'd say even when I was in real depths of pain, there were moments where I would reach for movement, and I would put songs on, and I would try to, because I was just in so much. I'd be sat down, I wouldn't be stood up dancing like I am now, but I would my body just kind of knew instinctively to move. It wanted to move. It was painful to move, but at times I would be like, okay, I don't know why, but for some reason I just want to put a track on, and I would rock back and forth, or I would sway, which also there's a the part of the body the part of the brain, when you sway, that kind of, it helps with pain relief. There's always kind of, we think we sort of sway a baby, for comfort. It calms us down. It comforts us. We sing lullabies because it comforts, and it,
And you're reminding me of a moment where I finally got my scan. The consultant, who was a sports science consultant, said to me, there's nothing physically wrong with you, which felt great in one way, awful in another. But one thing she did say that was really powerful for me was, when you are feeling the pain, you're not necessarily re-injuring yourself, because she could see it was a chronic pain cycle that I was in. And actually, that was one of the most empowering things, because then I did start to push into the discomfort more, and allowed myself to have some pain, but in a way where I was in control of that situation. So in a way where you're talking about your body, it was asking you to work with the pain in a way, to start to understand it. And I think that was a huge shift change for me mentally, because my fear was that I was constantly re-injuring myself in some way when I didn't even know what the injury was. I didn't have a label, but it felt like it had started, because mine was literally an overnight moment where I woke up and couldn't walk, from having a lovely run the day before to not being able to walk at all, literally during that night. So it was so sudden that it felt like an injury or a trauma to me. But that was really powerful, that she allowed me to start to move more despite the pain. And like you're saying, so movement, as well as so many things that you're describing as well, but movement really is a medicine in that sense, because and your body was telling you needed to move. So how much does movement play a part in your life now that you are free of pain generally?
Loads. So I have a kind of daily movement practice, which will include the way in which I bring sort of movement practice. So if I'm going to do rather than just I'm going for a walk or whatever, the way I bring it into my life is just to kind of incorporate it into stuff that I'm doing. So, so things like squatting and kind of low gait walking, or, stuff that's kind of lower down. I'll incorporate that by, walking between my kitchen and my living room, but in a low gait walk rather than standing up, or, get the Hoover and put the nozzle so it's quite low and do the hoovering so that you're down. So it's a way of incorporating it. And, for me, movement and play, they go hand in hand. So all of my movement is very, very playful. And, it keeps me young. They say, you don't stop playing because you get old because you stop playing, right? So absolutely. I love that phrase. And it's just like, I was in Regent's Park on Tuesday and I was just like, every single tree, I was like, I can climb that tree, I can climb. And I was just climbing up these trees. I was doing a photo shoot. And I was just climbing up all these trees and just kind of, got my bare feet, and I'm just kind of being playful, walking along the logs and doing that movement because I can.
Yes, you can.
And at least once a fortnight, I'm at ecstatic dance. And I haven't been running in a little while just because it's been a bit bleak outside. And, now we're coming into spring. So probably I'll get out and do some running. But I'm always out, regardless of the weather. I'm still out in the local meadows and, going for a walk. But also, playing as well.
And also the lovely thing is that your kids are seeing that too. So having seen you immobile, now they see you fun-loving, playful, and showing them, what life can really be. And I'm sure that feels incredible. I know it certainly does for me, because we know that so much we try and say and teach the next generation about things, but actually it's what they see that they really embody. So I'm sure that feels great too as well.
Well, there was a saying that I heard, I think it was Peter Crone, and he said, your children will inevitably fail at listening to you, but they will succeed in becoming you. Right. So they embody what you embody. So if I'm in the barefoot shoes, if I'm playing, if I'm, climbing trees and doing stuff with them and having fun, they're given permission to do the same. And, kids spend, we don't need to go into the school system and we could spend another hour talking about that and my views on that.
I've done a podcast on that as well.
Okay, right. You aligns with a lot of my values. But it's like, if a kid's stuck and sat in a classroom all day, they want to go and burn off some steam. And, if I'm doing that with them, then it gives them full permission to be completely themselves, because mummy's doing it as well, right? It's not like I'm sat there on my phone, or if I'm sort of, you climb the tree and I'm going to sit, we do it together. We go splashing in the river and we really enjoy spending our time. We did a play fight in the mud the other day. We came back absolutely covered in mud and we were just sort of wrestling in it. And it's just, I can move in that way now. Like I can get up and down off the floor, and I can tolerate the discomfort of being covered in mud because I'm not in pain. Whereas actually, having mud on me, having like my sensory experience, I don't know if this was the same for you, but my sensory experience was very different as well, because extra sensory stimulus would be like with sound, touch, of something on my skin, like that would actually be, or even smell sometimes would be overwhelming, because I'm already heightened because of the pain. So then extra sensory stuff. So actually now I can have the music up and I can go to these loud dances, and I can, I'm fully engaged with the world now, that I would shut off certain parts of it because they were too overwhelming for me. And now it's like, fully embracing it all.
A whole different world. No, it's wonderful. So, part of the reason that we, have shared experience as well is that we're now both sharing a bit of a mission in our different ways. Because I think when you have had such a deep experience, you often come out the other side thinking, I don't want this to happen to other people. I want to prevent this. And obviously both of us, to different levels, different ways, have had experiences that have taken us to dark places. And often there's a lot of people out there who don't have that, but perhaps aren't really happy with their lot. They hear about this sort of thriving, these words, playful, and enjoying moving, and feeling sort of in a more optimal place, and yet they're not there. So to people like that, what would you say? Would you say that it's a good idea to question where you're at and look around at other ways of making changes in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't have to wait until we're acutely unwell or chronically unwell, to be able to implement these practices. And yeah, I mean, it sort of is what I see, as a therapist, is people wait until they are really overwhelmed and kind of hitting the self-destruct button, and just, it's really gotten to a point where they can't take it anymore. And that's when they come for help. But actually being proactive, I'm well now, right? I could go, okay, well, I'm better. I've used these practices to get myself better. I'll just ditch everything and I'll go back to how I used to live. But I know that I will end up back where I was, or, potentially. So it's worth it to me. And I guess, you and I have had that experience. That's our motivation. I know what it's like to be writhing in agony and not able to go out with my family. Right? I know how miserable that feels. And the feeling of that is enough of a driver to say, well, I don't want to. And it's also not just the fear, it's how amazing I feel. Like, I love going to ecstatic dance. I love doing these playful exercises. I like sitting on the floor, actually. It's comfortable for me. And I don't sleep in a bed. I sleep on the floor as well. And if I go somewhere and I sleep in a bed, that's more uncomfortable for me, because it once your body's adjusted, actually, so I'm so much more comfortable on the floor. Which is great, because there's not always a chair. So for me, I can always sit down if I want to. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of conversations that I have with people who, aren't necessarily unwell, but they will they'll go, oh, what are the barefoot shoes? Tell me about those, and they'll kind of hear about them, and they'll kind of be a bit curious, and they'll see me sitting on the floor, because it's hard, if you're the girl that sits on the floor, which is what I was called as a nickname when I went to this training course. What's her name? The girl that sits on the floor. Yeah, okay. But if you're that, you're quite noticeable. I was at a conference with 300 health practitioners recently, and I was at the front, sat on the floor. I wasn't going to sit in the chairs for 8 hours because I would be uncomfortable. So I get noticed, and people will talk to me about it. I do think that without that motivator, it's tricky, because it's like, well, that's never going to happen to me. I'm not going to get that unwell. But I didn't think it was going to happen to me.
And neither did I. And I was I was a fit person. I did lots of exercise. So absolutely, it wasn't.
I was a runner. I had an active job.
Exactly.
For me now, my diet now is so different. I mean, that was another thing. No one ever addressed diet with me, and how that can impact, inflammation and pain and what have you. So, now I eat in a particular way. I didn't really eat very healthily, but I was pretty okay. Couldn't complain. And then very quickly I was not okay. And so, yeah, it's difficult to talk to somebody who hasn't had the problems, and because the way we're talking, sitting on the floor is socially abnormal, right? Most people don't sit on the floor, but it is biologically normal. It's our biological normal to sit on the floor.
Absolutely.
We didn't evolve to sit in chairs. We're ground dwellers, or we might be in trees or whatever, but we're not designed to sit in these curved chairs, and so yeah, but it's socially extreme, right? Because I'm the girl that sits on the floor.
But and we do our own thing. We take something on, and we either embrace it fully. It's what works for us. And I still sit on chairs. My sort of way of going about things is awareness, knowledge about what that chair could do to me. So if I'm on the chair for too long, I will be shifting positions. I'll be getting up and down to the floor. I won't necessarily be the girl at the front on the floor. And I'm all right with that, because I know I've got my toolkit. I was at a conference last week, and they asked me to do a 5-minute movement break between speakers. And it was the most fun thing, because the entire audience got up and did the movements, and they all, to a person, clearly felt better after they'd done it than before, because there'd been so much sitting. So when you sort of phrase it like that, and you think about, an 8-hour conference, there's always tools and ways of mixing things up. But if I don't sit on the floor for a whole day, I crave the floor. And when I sit back down, I feel so much better. It's interesting. My body literally craves it. So yeah, no, I think it is all about taking things and empowering the person with that knowledge and the awareness of what could improve their lives, or, as it was for you and for me, make them completely and utterly different and better. So tell me, you're now in what you holistic pain therapy. That's the right terminology for the service that you're offering? Tell us a little bit about that before we finish.
So holistic pain therapy is sort of what I've called it, because it doesn't really exist. So my
I like the name.
So my clinic's called the Holistic Pain Clinic, and essentially it's combining all of the things that worked for me, and being one place to kind of get that, because I had very disjointed medical care. So I would see a psychologist for my mental health, and I would see the sort of medical doctor who might do some procedures, or but nobody spoke to each other. There was no kind of overlap, and there was no understanding that these things were linked together, despite the fact that I was seeing these different people. And so, I've trained in a number of disciplines. So I'm a trained psychotherapist. I'm also a nutrition coach and a movement coach. And so I kind of bring all of those things together. I do nature therapy. So it's combining nature, nutrition, movement, and, like you said, the talking part, just even talking about what's happening. It's a really, depression and anxiety can really kind of creep in, even if you don't think you've had a particularly traumatic experience that is driving your pain. You will have underlying things going because you're in pain. So your body is on higher alert. You're feeling more stressed. So you will finding ways of kind of offloading that onto someone who isn't your family, in the form of a counsellor, and being able to kind of talk about it. That can be incredibly helpful, but then also being able to work in a somatic way and work with the movement, with the breath work, with, the other things that are going to help with central nervous system regulation. And then the movement practices, the squatting, the barefoot, the sitting on the floor, the getting out into nature.
Lifestyle.
It's all lifestyle, and you know, it sounds a bit overwhelming because it's like, oh my goodness, all these things that I have to change. But as you said, every single person's different. So where I would start, pretty much with most people, you know, we'd start with looking at kind of down regulation tools to just, because, you know, if you're up here, it's not to help your pain. So that's kind of pretty much where we'd start with everybody, because then you've got some tools that you can use that are in your toolkit, and you can be empowered. And then kind of focusing, okay, so where could we make a few tweaks in your diet perhaps? Or, you know, for me, I'm very much an add in before you take other stuff away. And I'm not, you know, you mustn't eat all of this and this is causing, you know, I don't want to scare people, because, you know, there are certain foods that we eat that can exacerbate pain, which I now understand and I didn't before. However, if we suddenly change our diet, that can cause stress, which then also affects pain. So it's kind of all done in a very individualized way. And small definitely steps. Adding in foods that are going to support reducing inflammation, for me, is the key, rather than just taking out all these demon foods that we've said that you can't have, you know. So it's kind of doing it in a gentle way, and just kind of gradually. Like I know that a lot of people will hear my story and kind of go, well, I'm not getting rid of my sofa, you know, I'm not going to sit on the floor all the time. And that's fine. That's what I did. That's what worked for me. It was an all or nothing thing. I'm a bit of a all or nothing kind of gal at times anyway. So, you know, that was my journey. That doesn't need to be everybody else's journey. It might just be, you've got your sofa in your house, and just to start with, every now and then you go and you sit on the floor, and you just gradually increase that, you know, you don't have to, I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to go cold turkey and just get rid of it completely. But, you know, that's just what I happen to do. It isn't comfortable. And there is a big level of personal responsibility that has to drive it. I can't make you go home and do the things that, you know, and I'm not also claiming to have all of the answers. I'm just saying, well, this worked for me. It's worked for other people that I've worked with, and it might work for you. And so let's look at it.
And when people are in the position that both of us were, and then this may be the podcast, this may be that same podcast that for them says, what, there is more we can do, and these things, they're not medical procedures necessarily. That may be one angle, but this is a whole different area that I haven't really thought about, and I believe that it helped you, and I want to believe, because I need some hope, and so therefore in those circumstances, often people really are willing to try one or two things, and then if they're convinced by the one or two things, they'll then go to more. So you're giving a great service to people, and this has been a great conversation, because you've taken us through a real journey with you in your experience, which was from the depths of a really, really difficult time to clearly, as you put it, thriving. And you can hear that in the way that you speak. And I'm so happy for you that is the situation. But I'm also so grateful for you to come and share that with people, because only through sharing these stories can we then support each other and support ourselves. And if you don't know, you don't know. So awareness is everything. Awareness and then curiosity are the keys to being able to move forward, if that's what we need in our life. And obviously, if this isn't for you, the listener particularly, you'll often know someone that it could be for. So I urge listeners to also to share it, because it can be, as it was for you, just hearing one episode of something can be literally life-changing. So thank you so very much for coming on. I'm going to be linking your website details and your socials in the show notes. Once again, I'm really, really grateful for your time. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Been good to talk to you.
Absolute pleasure, always. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.